Morning to you. The Metropolitan Police are being urged to investigate allegations of cash for honours surrounding one of Prince Charles's charities. The chief executive of the Prince's Foundation has stepped down over claims of an honour being given to a Saudi businessman. Well, Enda Brady is in the newsroom for us this morning. And what more can you tell us, Enda?
Morning, Stephen. Well, this is acutely embarrassing for Prince Charles because Michael Fawcett is arguably his most trusted aide. He has been beside Charles for years. He's been working for the royal family since 1981, and 3 years ago he took the title of Chief Executive of the Prince's Foundation. Now, that is an umbrella group for all of Charles's charitable work. So Michael Fawcett really is key inner circle for Prince Charles, and the allegations in several Sunday newspapers today are that effectively he was selling access to the Prince in return for donations to various different charitable projects that Charles was involved in, primarily Dumfries House, which is an 18th century mansion in Ayrshire in Scotland, which Charles purchased in 2007 and has spent millions on refurbishing. And the man at the centre of all of this is a Saudi billionaire businessman called Dr. Mahfouz Mubarak bin Mahfouz. Now, he was given an honorary CBE in 2016. He has made many significant six-figure donations to the Prince's Foundation and other charitable interests that Charles is involved with. A letter published in several Sunday newspapers today from Michael Fawcett's office to the office of Dr. Mahfouz suggests that were he to continue with the donations, his CBE would be upgraded to a knighthood, and there also would be support for his application for British citizenship. Now, Mr. Fawcett denies any wrongdoing whatsoever. He has now temporarily stepped aside while this investigation begins. We have a statement from Douglas Connell. He is chair of the Prince's Foundation. We can take a look at that now. Mr. Connell says earlier today, Michael Fawcett offered to step down temporarily from active duties as chief executive of the Prince's Foundation while the trustees' investigation is ongoing. And he continues, the Prince's Foundation has accepted this offer. Michael fully supports the ongoing investigation, has confirmed that he will assist the investigation in every way. And we learn also that the Scottish Charity Commission, they now are looking at this as well. And Norman Baker, the former minister, is urging the Metropolitan Police to get involved.
OK, Enda, thank you. A row is engulfing the government about how to pay for social care. This week, the Prime Minister is expected to unveil long-awaited plans to cap social care payments. But to raise billions of pounds, the Prime Minister could be forced to raise taxes, and he's already under pressure from members of his own party. Analysis from the Institute for Government forecasts that fixing social care could cost about £10 billion a year. Now, a 1% rise in national insurance contributions, which Boris Johnson reportedly favours, would raise about £10 billion. But that would mean breaking a 2019 manifesto pledge and raising taxes for about 26 million working people. Our political correspondent Rob Powell has more.
None of the details have yet been confirmed officially by the government, but it is expected that national insurance will be the tax that will be targeted for an increase in order to pay for the social care reforms, but also for extra money to help with NHS backlogs. Now, that is likely to be very controversial within the Conservative Party because it goes against a manifesto pledge in 2019 not to up that tax. And I think there is already a degree of queasiness within the Conservative Party stretching into Boris Johnson's top team of cabinet ministers about the prospect of doing that. But equally, a number of MPs within the Tory party have identified a degree of political danger in putting up a tax like national insurance, which is not paid by pensioners and which disproportionately impacts younger and lower paid workers, in order to pay for the care of older people and also to ensure that they don't have to give away and use the sale of a property and all of the money from that in order to fund their care. One minister telling me that it was not a good fit to see with an across-the-board subsidy like this, a few people being targeted to have their assets protected. One senior backbencher also said that this didn't seem like a very conservative policy, while a newly elected MP said that they were concerned about the contrast of safeguarding people's inheritances while at the same time cutting the universal credit uplift, which is expected at the end of the month.
The government says no decision has been made about the future of Grenfell Tower, despite a Sunday Times report today claiming ministers have been due to announce its demolition. A spokesperson for the Housing Ministry has said there'll be no change to the tower before the 5th anniversary of the fire in June next year. Taliban special forces have broken up a march led by Afghan women demanding equal rights from their new rulers. The demonstration, the second of its kind in 2 days in Kabul, ended abruptly after fighters fired into the air. Outdoor dining could be here to stay as the government plans to make permanent some of the changes to hospitality brought about by the pandemic. Marquees in pubs and outdoor street markets could be allowed all year round. Flying at the Bournemouth Air Festival will go ahead as planned today after a plane taking part in the event crashed into Poole Harbour. 2 people were rescued from the aircraft, which witnesses told Sky News was carrying a wing walker. Ivor Bennett reports from Bournemouth.
Look at the left of the screen. That splash, the moment a plane crashed at speed into Poole Harbour. In slow motion, it becomes clear just how terrifyingly close it came to others, somehow avoiding both the yachts in the water and the land. Those who saw it say a wing walker was standing on top just moments before.
It was just terrifying to watch that the plane hit the water, went nose first, and then I think the pilot and the wing walker were submerged for about 10 seconds or so before they managed to break free. The pilot seemed very calm as he swam to the rib, but the poor girl was just screaming. But luckily both of them they seemed okay, apart from the shock. And luckily the rib was there.
Miraculously, both the pilot and wing walker escaped with only minor injuries after being pulled from the plane by a nearby boat just seconds before it sank.
Then we see a lady appear, young girl appear from underneath the aircraft, just the torso, screaming, obviously in shock. They were dragging them into the small boat. This time the aircraft's actually sinking. It was literally 30 seconds and it was well under. And we thought if they hadn't got out of there, they'd probably, the worst would have happened. It was so frightening.
The small aircraft was performing in the Bournemouth Air Festival and came down at around 4 o'clock. In a statement, organisers said it is a huge relief for all those involved in the Air Festival that the incident has resulted in the display crew being removed from the water safe and well. Efforts are now being made to recover the wreckage, which is barely 10 metres from the harbour wall. It's still not known what caused the crash, but the festival organisers have said aerial displays will continue as planned on Sunday. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Poole Harbour.
It's emerged that New Zealand had tried to deport the man who injured 7 people during a knife attack in a shopping mall in Auckland. The man, who came from Sri Lanka, was shot dead by police. 3 people are still in a critical condition in hospital. Well, let's get the latest now from the political editor of TVNZ, Jessica Much-McKay.
We can reveal today the terrorist's name as Atal Samsudeen. He came here to New Zealand on a student visa 10 years ago. 2 years later, in 2013, he applied for refugee status, saying that he had been kidnapped and tortured because he's Tamil in Sri Lanka. Now, in 2018, it was discovered that the documents he used for that were fraudulent, and New Zealand authorities were in the process of revoking that refugee status and trying to deport him when the attack took place on Friday. It was a 4-year battle with New Zealand officials and immigration officials to try and get that through, and highlighted big gaps in our terrorism laws. His family have also spoken, his brother coming out in a statement saying that they're heartbroken and shocked by these actions. His mother did an interview with Sri Lankan TV saying that her son was radicalised here in New Zealand by his next door neighbours. Now our government has responded to that, saying that he was a lone wolf and they are not looking for anyone else in relation to this.
The government looks set to overrule its own vaccine advisors and roll out the coronavirus jab to 12 to 15-year-olds, but it won't be the first European country to do so. In Switzerland, for example, children as young as 12 have been eligible for a jab for more than 2 months. Well, let's talk to Dr. Melvin Snikas, a vaccinologist and public health physician based in Zurich. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Stephen.
What's your assessment on how effective these vaccinations are for 12 to 15-year-olds?
So these vaccines have been assessed for safety and efficacy in children 12 to 15 years of age. And we have seen that the immune response in these age groups are similar to the immune response in older individuals.
What are you doing in terms of the number of jabs? I mean, do they get double jabbed at that age, or is it a single injection?
They get the same amount of vaccination, Stephen.
You see, over here, there has certainly been discussion about a single injection or even potentially half a dose for that sort of age group, saying that just wouldn't have the same efficacy.
Well, there are other things to consider as well, because you could also look at whether these kids have been exposed to SARS-CoV-2 in the past, because we also have seen that those who have been exposed to SARS-CoV-2 in the past and given one dose of the COVID vaccine, they have better immune response as those who were not exposed in the past.
What do you make then? What's your understanding of the decision by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation here, which advises the British government on these things, when they sort of just have voted against recommending it for that age group?
So from what I understand, they were very clear in saying that the margin of benefit is considered too small to support universal vaccination, right? So they're not saying not to give it to children aged 12 to 15, but to give it to those with specific conditions like blood cancers, sickle cell disease, diabetes, congenital heart disease, and many others. So it's not really saying not to give it to these children. So it's clear that for these children, the risk of the benefit of the vaccine is significantly higher than not getting the vaccine, basically, and the potential for COVID infection.
Well, for those children, yes, but I mean, they would be getting vaccinated anyway at some point. But it's for everybody else. I mean, is there? I mean, they're saying that the benefit is so marginal, it's not worth having for everybody else.
Well, they are saying that at the moment, the data is not yet enough for them to consider this to give the vaccine to everyone, right? They also mentioned that it's difficult to factor in long COVID because they don't know at the moment how common long COVID is in this age group. But it's also good to highlight that they mentioned that their advice does not include wider issues such as disruption to schools, right? So it's not that they're giving this as an advice, scientific advice, but if you look at the bigger picture, for example, then the ministers could consider seeking separate advice on this.
I mean, what sort of impact has it had in Switzerland? What sort of take-up has there been within that age group?
The uptake, I would say, could be better, but at least some of the kids are now getting vaccinated. It also depends on the parents, because in Switzerland, there is a high number of anti-vaxxers, I would say. So not as good as in countries like France, for example, or Brazil, but it's getting better, I would say.
Okay, Dr. Snikas, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Well, let's have a look at the latest COVID data for you for the UK. And there have been a further 37,578 new cases reported in the last 24 hours, and a further 120 people have died. That takes the total number of deaths to 133,161. Another 33,000 first doses of a vaccine have been given, 108,000 second doses have been given, which means 43.25 million people are now fully vaccinated. Just to remind you that Trevor Phillips on Sunday returns later this morning. He's going to be talking to, amongst others, the Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi. That all starts at 8:30. But now, let's have a look at the weather for you.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, temperatures are set to rise in the late summer sunshine over the next few days, but there's going to be some rain in the north and west today. Most places having a dry start, just a few showers, the western fringes of Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Western Isles. Warm sunny spells developing widely across Britain this morning, although it's going to be rather grey and misty around those Cornish coasts and the Channel Islands. Bright spells for Northern Ireland and the Republic, but outbreaks of rain will spread in from the west. That rain may turn heavy at times as it spread eastwards across Northern Ireland and into parts of Scotland during this afternoon.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A Google Maps for graves. That's the aim of a new project which will help people trying to find where their ancestors are buried. It's going to visit each of the Church of England's 19,000 graveyards, and the plan is to photograph and map every headstone, grave and memorial. Fraser Maud has been finding out more.
It's a mammoth task. Mapping, photographing and referencing millions of gravestones in thousands of graveyards. The goal, to provide a digital map of burial sites and records that will be invaluable to historians and genealogists and fascinating to the public.
We're here in Barton Churchyard near Penrith in Cumbria, and there we can see the headstones, we can see the trees, we can see the graves. And again, imagining we're overseas somewhere, there we have a photograph of that very headstone that we can see here. Obviously these are now protected because there's numerous stories of records being lost through fire or theft or floods, up here in particular, for example, so they could be lost with flooding. We also have a copy of the original burial register, so they're protected, and also having them online means people are not having to manhandle them, so they're not deteriorating through heavy use and abuse and that sort of thing.
And as you say, they're accessible from anywhere in the world.
Exactly.
The backpacks the team used to collect the data cost £100,000 each and contain 5 cameras, 2 laser scanners and the latest GPS technology.
It may only take an hour or so to scan a graveyard like this, but with 50 million measurements being gathered, it can take up to a week to process that information. And with 19,000 graveyards to be mapped, the 7-year timescale for this project could be a tight one.
Once the initial data has been fed into the system, the local parishes themselves can keep the online records updated.
The survey put into context everything within the churchyard, the building, the headstones and even the vegetation. And what we learned at that point was where the old maps weren't exact in scale and detail. So we've had that immediate advantage.
There are benefits for ecologists, biologists and botanists too. The data gathered by this study will also be used as part of a national biodiversity survey of the sometimes very rare plants and animals that are living amongst our dead. Fraser Maud, Sky News, Penrith.
Now, the UK is set for a rise in unemployment when the furlough scheme ends, though recruitment figures are expected to stay strong. The Resolution Foundation predicts that about 150,000 jobs could be lost, but it praises the furlough scheme, saying it's protected more than 11 million jobs. So let's talk to Research Director at the Resolution Foundation, Greg Thwaites. Good to see you this morning. So, bit of a bumpy ride ahead then.
Yes, the furlough scheme's been very successful in protecting people's jobs. It protected over 11 million jobs throughout the crisis, and this was during the worst recession for 300 years in the UK. Now, as the furlough scheme comes to an end at the end of this month, we still have maybe 1.5 million people on furlough, and the big question is what happens to them now?
Well, what is going to happen to them?
Well, some of them will hopefully find new work because we've got a great deal of hiring going on, hiring at record rates in the UK. But we think that some of them are likely to become unemployed and therefore unemployment will stop falling and maybe start to rise again. And therefore, it's crucial that the government supports these people in their job search and in particular doesn't go ahead with the benefit cut that it's planning at the end of this month.
I mean, it's interesting because I mean, the way you talk, there is an assumption that every one of those 1.5 million people on furlough are not going to be kept on by the business they're working for, which isn't true, is it?
I expect some of them will be kept on, but the economy's been more or less open for a couple of months now, and these people are still on furlough. So it's likely that some of those people are being kept on furlough because they don't have jobs to go back to. Not all of them, but some of them. It's also very striking that whereas at the beginning of the furlough scheme, most of the people on furlough were young, they were disproportionately very young people, we now see a lot of older workers on furlough. They're the ones who are disproportionately left on furlough. And those people, when they lose their jobs, older people, it tends to be very serious for them. They may be slightly less adaptable. They might have to take bigger pay cuts. They may have more responsibility. So it's serious for anyone when you lose your job. But if you lose your job when you're older and you need to maybe move house or move into a different industry, that can be very tough.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I don't want to underestimate how tough it is on the personal front. And if you're going through that, you know, you've got our sympathies. However, looking at the figure, the cold hard facts, if you like, you know, there is still a strong recruitment in the UK, isn't it? We know there are plenty of jobs available. This should be a time of buoyancy by next year, shouldn't it?
Well, I certainly think there's good reason to believe that hiring will continue to stay strong. You're right that there are many vacancies, record vacancies, but some of those vacancies aren't in the same places or in the same industries as the workers who are either unemployed or who might be about to become unemployed in the next few months. And it's going to take time for people to retrain and to find those new jobs. And over that period of time, that's the period when we might see unemployment rise and stop falling.
I mean, you talk about the £20 a week increase in universal credit. I mean, it's a bit unrealistic, isn't it? Because that's an across-the-board payment, because it's the cheapest way of doing it. That is, it's unrealistic, isn't it, to expect that to stay for everyone who's claiming that benefit, isn't it?
I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it would cost a few £1 billion a year at a time when, you know, last year the government borrowed over £300 billion and the economy is worth like £2,500 billion. So it's not an unaffordable sum of money. And we need to remember that lots of that money goes to people who are in work and it's just supporting them to top up their wages, or to people who can't work, as well as people who are looking for work. So I think it's an achievable sum. We've afforded it over the past year, and I think we can afford it. We can afford to keep it up. If we don't keep the benefit going, if we cut benefits like the government is planning to do, that would be one of the biggest benefit cuts in like 90 years.
But it was only ever brought in as I mean, you talk about a benefit cut. Realistically, it's not a benefit cut, is it? Because it was only ever brought in as a temporary measure.
It was brought in as temporary, but it's done a great job of limiting the hardship that's happened over the crisis, because while the furlough scheme protected lots of jobs, it didn't protect everyone. And we're going to see, I'm afraid to say, a little bit more hardship as the furlough scheme comes to an end. And like we're saying in the report, not everyone moves into work. So we don't think the time is right to cut this benefit now.
So a couple of £1 billion, you say, isn't a lot of money. There's a lot of struggle at the moment, seeing how the government is going to try to raise £10 billion a year to pay for this change in social care, which, I mean, is desperately desperately needed this sort of overhaul, and obviously national insurance looks like it could be the way forward in that. What does the Resolution Foundation think?
We certainly think that social care needs more money. It doesn't have enough resources. It's rationed too much. You have to be too seriously in need before you get it. And we think that taxes or national insurance are going to have to rise in order to pay for higher social care. The problem with just national insurance is that you don't pay it once you're at state pension age. So the people who maybe you might be a millionaire, but a retired millionaire and pay no national insurance. You don't pay it on non-wage income. So you don't pay it if you receive rents or profits. It's only paid on wages, and it's only paid on wages earned by people who are lower than the state pension age. And then it's also paid by people on lower incomes than income taxes. So we don't think it's a fair way to raise more money. We think income tax would be much better.
And yet, they're talking £10 billion over, 26 million working people. I mean, if we took out the money that employers make and made this a flat payment by everyone, it's still less than 80 pence a week.
So this is one of the reasons we think that money should be raised by the government to pay for social care. We certainly agree that needs to happen, and we're encouraged that the government is looking at how to do it. But we think income tax is a much fairer way. It's paid, but not by people who are on very low earnings, and it's paid by people irrespective of their age when they earn money, rather than national insurance, which, like I say, you don't pay if you're on state pension age or above.
OK. Greg Thwaites from the Resolution Foundation. Well, it's time for the papers this morning with anthropologist Marianne Hotter and deputy editor of Spiked, Tom Slater. And, Marianne, last time we're going to see you for a little while. I'm sorry to say.
I know. I'm going off on mat leave because I've got a very big baby bump just off camera.
Oh, well, look, enjoy.
Thank you. I will be back. Don't worry.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just been nice. Cole won't be on his own now. He's going to have a little brother or sister. That'll be nice.
Name? Oh,
of course I remember his name. He's a cutie. OK, Tom, let's kick off with the Observer looking at a cabinet row over Afghanistan.
Yeah, so Tobias Ellwood, who's the chair of the Commons Select Defence Committee, is calling for an end to this pretty unseemly row which is broken out between Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, and Ben Wallace, the heading up the Ministry of Defence, which is obviously broken out since the fall of Afghanistan. So on one hand, you've had Dominic Raab coming under a lot of fire for staying on his holiday in Crete as Kabul fell, suggesting that really the problem was intelligence, and also shifting some of the blame really over towards the army and towards the Ministry of Defence. Ben Wallace since hitting back, suggesting that he knew in July that this is how things were going to pan out, that therefore Dominic Raab really implying heavily that he really shouldn't have been away, and also bringing the Foreign Office under a lot of criticism for getting diplomats out whilst leaving Ministry of Defence staff and the army to deal with the processing of visa applications for Afghan refugees. So I think it is incredibly unseemly, as Tobias Ellwood says. I mean, first of all, there's plenty of blame to go around. I mean, this was a really colossal failure of military intelligence, yes, of general strategy, of 20 years of nation building, really so much blood and treasure expended towards building a state that collapsed in a number of days. But also just in terms of, there were a lot of people who fell asleep at the wheel as Kabul fell. You know, the leading civil servants in the Foreign Office, in the Ministry of Defence and the Home Office were all on holiday, along with Dominic Raab, not together, but at the same time in different places, as Kabul fell. So I think for this to kind of descend into a pretty unseemly spat, a kind of Westminster discussion about who's up and who's down and is Raab on the way out, I just think feels like a bit of an insult really to the people who've been affected by this tragedy on the ground.
OK, Marianne, to the Sunday Telegraph. Another war in the Conservative Party, this time over tax increases.
Yeah, exactly. It's probably going to get unseemly again. They've got a lot of blame to go around. So this is about the proposed tax rises or national insurance contribution rises that are going to be introduced. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and Boris Johnson are going to probably face a lot of pushback, not just from the electorate, but also from people within their own party. So the whole principle is this new NHS and social care levy. Your previous guest from the Resolution Foundation was talking about this as well. How do we pay the bills? Because the bills are enormous. There's going to be about 30 million people on NHS waiting lists, waiting for elective procedures, scans, all that kind of everyday business of the NHS that has been put on hold because of the pandemic. Now we're looking at going into the winter season where perhaps some people might need COVID boosters. We're going to have flu jab rollout, but also all the regular stuff that has been put off that might be more serious because people haven't been able to see doctors or dentists or other healthcare professionals for almost 2 years now. So the government are suggesting that the proposal that's kind of circulating at the moment is that they will add perhaps at least 1 pence, possibly more, to national insurance contributions. And as the guy from the Resolution Foundation pointed out, that is a blanket tax on employees' earnings as well as employers. So it'll affect small and medium businesses as well as large businesses because of what they're paying in as well. And it kicks in at a very, very low level. It isn't taxed on rental income. It isn't taxed on investment income. It isn't taxed for anyone over the state pension age. And so there will be lots of people who are richer, better off and able to pay more into the shared pot, to pay for social care, to pay for the NHS, to pay for all those things that we as a country need. But they won't be paying people on low incomes who are going to be hardest hit. And Stephen, you said it's only 80p a week. It's only 80p a week for you or me because you and I can probably afford that. But lots of people who are literally counting every penny to make sure that stays over their heads, that the lights stay on, that their kids have food in the fridge in the morning. 80p a week is a lot. It really does add up. So the Conservative Party members themselves are actually saying, this is going to impact support on the Red Wall. So all that sort of traditionally Labour seats that shifted over to the Conservatives in the last election. One MP who isn't, or a cabinet minister actually, who isn't named, says it's morally, economically and politically wrong to be looking at national insurance contributions rather than some other kind of taxation. It's going to be a big row.
Yeah, going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the next week. Tom, there's all this talk about getting young people to get their vaccinations, concerns about take-up. What doesn't help is if they have to travel miles and miles and miles to get their jab, which is what the Sunday Mirror is talking about this morning.
Yeah, so an extraordinary story in the Sunday Mirror here. So as you were saying, 16, 17-year-olds have been urged to get jabbed. There's been this big grab a jab campaign, and yet a number of young people are finding that when they go on this NHS website to find out where the nearest centre is where they can get vaccinated, in some cases are being asked to travel as much as 70 miles to go and get this done. So there's one 16-year-old from Hornsey in East Yorkshire who was offered Leeds or Grimsby as prospective places to get vaccinated, so 70 and 50 miles away respectively. And it's just another huge unforced error, it feels like, on the part of the government and the rollout, which is expending so much kind of energy in trying to make sure that young people get vaccinated, widening the number of people who can get vaccinated in terms of young people, but failing to make this straightforward, given the fact that a lot of the NHS sites that do exist for vaccinating people are over 18s only at the moment. So in the story, some government sources push back a little bit that they're building out capacity, that some of this might have just been glitches on the website, but it's certainly not a good look and certainly not helpful when you're trying to push as many younger people to get vaccinated as possible, less for their own health, but for the health of those around them. This certainly doesn't help matters.
No, it doesn't. We've just got about 90 seconds, so you can squeeze in a couple of papers. The Observer Online, Mary-Anne, has got pupil premium and the number of children who are going to miss out.
Yeah, so this is a story about how the pupil premium funding, so the extra cash that goes to children who are coming from less well-off backgrounds, is accounted for. And basically the government have shifted it, so they're not measuring the number of pupils a school has in January of a year. They're measuring it from the previous October. So 60,000 pupils, and therefore the schools that support those pupils are going to lose out on funding. There's one school in Haringey in London that's going to lose almost £45,000 worth of money because the government aren't going to count the pupils who are actually enrolled for September because they're counting for the ones that were there 11 months previous.
Yeah,
it's just, again, an unforced error, as Tom says.
Lies, damned lies and statistics, all this sort of thing, isn't it, in a strange way. Let's just finish off then, 30 seconds, Tom. The Yorkshire woman who got Brexit done, as it were.
Exactly. So Yorkshire woman has earned her place in history, as it turns out that Linton Crosby, so the Tories' the election supremo, pointed out that this slogan wasn't the brainchild of Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson or anyone, but actually a woman in a focus group in Yorkshire who came out with this perfect free word slogan that many people credit with winning the last election. So, yeah, great story of one person who's got their place in history, it turns out.
Yeah. Good. Yorkshire plain talking. That's what it is. Get it done. I can hear it now. Really good to see you both this morning. Mary Ann, we'll see you in a few months.